Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode number 41. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. If you're looking for more information about the podcast, past guests, or want to catch up on previous episodes, or just want to drop me a line, it's all at the website, desertladydiaries.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries and on Twitter as Desert Lady Diary. Today, you'll hear from Pat Rimmintgon, a 40-year resident of 29 Palms. She'll talk about finding her desert home and eventually repairing it. Pat's the author of the book, The Adobes of 29 Palms, written to remember these functional, historical desert structures and the people who came and built them. Today, my guest is Pat Rimmintgon. She's a longtime resident of 29 Palms, past president of the 29 Palms Historical Society, retired employee of the Joshua Tree Natural History Association, and author of The Adobes of 29 Palms. And also, if you haven't listened to the audio portions of Kim Stringfellow's Jackrabbit Homestead Project, I highly recommend it because you will hear Pat talking about the homesteads in that audio. The audio can be found at jackrabbithomestead.com. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sure. What was your very first experience with the desert?
The very first experience with the desert was in the 1960s, actually, when my husband won a weekend trip to Las Vegas in July. And so we went to Las Vegas in July, and of course in the 60s Las Vegas was not as it is today. It was quite small, a total different feel to it. It was also must have been one of those super moons. It was dry, it was hot, and the moon was gorgeous, and I said, ooh, I like this place. But we didn't, apart from the gambling and all that sort of thing, was of no particular interest. Right. The next time we went to the desert was a visit to Palm Springs. Again, in the 60s, Palm Springs was much smaller. It closed in the summertime and was only open in the winter, really. Not too many air-conditioned cars at the time.
No.
And then we went to camp in Joshua Tree. But there was something about each of those visits that said, I like this place. It's dry, it's nice. I like this open spaces. And basically that was the first introduction to the desert. Just short visits.
At that time, where were you living?
Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Actually, more nearer the coast, Mar Vista.
Oh, okay, yeah,
near
yeah.
Santa Monica Airport.
Okay, yes,
right
exactly.
There.
And what brought you to the States?
To the States, I always say Harold Wilson, which doesn't really mean much, but the economy in Britain at the time was pathetic, and my husband got a raise in salary, but the taxes were higher, so he actually brought home less money without
Sounds familiar.
Raise. Does that sound familiar? But anyway, he was offered a job in Los Angeles. We took it, and here we are.
Wow, so was that the 50s?
67.
67, okay, and then that's...
And two small children, and...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
At what point after these visits to the desert and liking it was the decision made, we're going to move to the desert?
To move to the desert was buying a weekend home. LA was getting busier, the marina was growing and more traffic, and we lived close by, and we thought to get away from the hustle and bustle, let's see if we can find a weekend place within reasonable driving distance. And we saw an advert in the paper for an adobe house on 22 acres with its own well and chickens. Now, of course, we had no idea what an adobe was. 22 acres seemed like the end of the earth. It was in some place called 29 Palms. Never heard of it. But anyway, we drove out, saw this disgusting little house, but the wide open spaces, it was spring. It must have been a good spring because it was just full of flowers. And it was lovely, and we did an impulse buy. Foolish move. But, so for the next few years, we were part-time visitors, coming at weekends, school vacations, and so on and so forth.
Nice. So when was the decision made then to come out permanently?
Permanently came in 88, when my husband was working in the Palm Springs area, and the children had left school. He said, why stay in Los Angeles? Is getting more and more crowded. So we decided that, sell up in LA, come out to 29 Palms. Basically, that was it. But I had been spending a lot of time in 29 Palms because I then found out what adobe meant. Due to the fact that the first summer, at the end of the summer, we had as we used to have, good old storm, summer storms, and the rain came down in torrents, and we discovered the roof leaked. And not only did the roof leak, but the water running down the walls was melting the house.
Oh, gosh.
So now we discovered that adobe meant mud.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I started trying to learn how to repair it and the history of it and so on and so forth.
Oh, wow, yeah. And then wrote a book about the Adobes of 29 Palms.
It took a little bit of time before that actually happened. But it was in the course of finding out, a lot of things happened at the same time.
Okay.
Because in order to find out about how to repair the house, there was plenty of information, this is BC, before computer, how to build, how to make a brick, how to do this, but not how to repair. So I went to the local library, and the librarian said to me, "Oh, do you know Ted Hayes?" Now this is in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. "Do you know Ted Hayes?" And I said, "No." He said, "Oh," she said, "well, he's just built an adobe house."
Oh.
Right? So I thought, "Oh, he's got round all the building codes and knows all the ins and outs." So I phoned up and I said, "I believe you have an adobe house, might I come and, And he said, "Of course." It was then that I discovered that he'd just built it in 1936.
Oh my gosh.
Whoops. And he'd been the first high school principal in 29 Palms. Oh, wow. So between one thing and another, he told me about repairing adobe. He lived in an adobe house. I then went to the local library and discovered that their history section included interviews, taped interviews with people who had homesteaded and built their own adobe houses. And I was so enchanted with this thing that I actually volunteered to do transcripts, to transcribe the tapes that they'd done.
Oh, wow.
Which meant that I was learning the local history.
Exactly.
And when I'd finished with the library project, as it were, then was National Monument then asked me if I would transcribe some of their tapes that they had, which again opened up the field.
Right.
After that, I got to work.
Yeah.
There, etc.
Oh,
and
my God.
Basically, that's...
So tell me about repairing the adobe. What was all involved in that? What kind of materials did you need? Where did you have to go to get them? How did that all work?
Well, the simple method was told to me by Ted Hayes. And basically, and muds differ from place to place depending on what the salts are in it. Mm-hmm. Most of the people who built here, I say here being 29 Palms,
right,
got the material, the clay, from the dry lakes or mine tailings.
What are those?
That's when they've been digging out the gold mines.
Oh, okay.
And so some of the stuff is clay that they get out of there. So it's the clay that you need to mix with sand and water, obviously, and get the right consistency, and away you go. Basically, it's a very simple recipe, but it's not like baking a cake. You can't say take a pound of this and a pound of that. Each place differs.
Okay.
So it's very, very difficult to do. You put your clay in a jam jar with some water and you shake it up.
Oh, so you're like experimenting to get your proper mix.
So you just shake it up, put it on the table and leave it for 24 hours and you'll see it separate out. Mm. And then that'll give you the idea of how much clay content there is in the clay that you've brought. Wow. And then that depends on how much sand you mix with it.
Right. And then application?
Oh, well, Ted said, if it cracks, you've got too much clay.
Oh.
If it falls off the wall, you've got too much sand. It's as simple as that. And all it is hard work.
Yeah, exactly. So from the moment you met him until the moment you made all your repairs, or is that kind of a constant thing with the adobe?
It's sort of constant. And I did a lot of experimenting. First of all, mend the roof. That was the important part.
Was it the terracotta? Or
No. In
Okay.
this case, it was just one of the asphalt, ordinary type of roofs. But it's the oldest standing adobe in 29 Palms. It was actually built in 1929.
Wow. And who built it?
John Meyer,
okay,
who came and, like most of the people who came to homestead in 29 Palms, they were veterans of World War I with some kind of, usually a breathing problem. They weren't all mustard gas, but they might have had asthma or TB or something. Deserts weren't considered the best place for homesteading, which is supposed to be for agriculture, but it's not the best place.
No.
But, however, it was great for health. And I often wonder, because some of these people made their own bricks and everything about adobe is heavy, hard work, So I often wonder, was it the clean, fresh, warm? Was the good water? Was it the fresh air? Was it the dry air? Was it the exercise of working with the adobe? But a lot of these people regained most of their health, not necessarily 100%, and they made 29 Palms their permanent home. So that was how they, as I say, they got on. And so you read up about them, and they really don't say too much. They say, we built our house. They don't say, we nearly died.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because it's so remote, and especially at that time, there wasn't. Yeah. The closest place was what, Banning?
Banning.
Right.
Well, that's another thing. Because if you're going to homestead, you've got to have a dwelling, minimum dwelling, some kind of dwelling. Mm-hmm. Now, if you are 60-something miles of bad road from Banning, we're talking ruts in the sand. We're not even talking a paved road. You're probably on a very small government pension, a military pension, I don't know. You're certainly not rich. Of course, you're now talking, by 1929, you're talking Depression time.
Right.
Also, one forgets, it's also about the same time as the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. So you've got a lot of down things happening in the country. You've got these people in 29 Palms. They've got to build a house. They're miles from someplace.
Civilization.
You probably can't afford the materials to buy a stick house, and transport, even if you had somebody else do it, freighting is still expensive. However, you've got mud, clay on the dry lakes. You've certainly got plenty of sand, plenty of sunshine. Water was available either from Bagley stores or if you'd built your own well.
Right.
And the sun is the only thing you need to bake your bricks. So that was the way to go. And in 29 Palms, even now, there's over 90 adobe structures built from the 20s. A couple have gone, of course, earthquake and so on. But they are. So
yeah, that's really cool. So when you were transcribing these oral histories, are there a couple of things that really stick out in your mind that were amazing or just really interesting or that shocked you or surprised you?
I don't know. I think the thing that surprised me, I don't think I was shocked by anything. I think the thing that surprised me was the way people took the way they were living for granted. They weren't complaining. I'm miles from nowhere and I don't have electricity and I don't have this, and they weren't complaining. They were getting on with life. And if something went wrong, they had to try and fix it. That was basically it.
Right.
They didn't sort of go into how much hard work some little thing entailed.
They just kind of rolled up their sleeves and did it.
Like we built our house. They didn't say how difficult it was to drag the material, mix the material, if they were building an adobe, or trying to grow stuff. Almost impossible with the ground squirrels and the rabbits and so on and so forth. And there was obviously more rabbits because people seem to eat a great deal of rabbit.
Tastes like chicken.
Not quite, but it's pretty good. I did recently go and I saw some rabbit in the store and it was $14 a pound.
Gracious.
I thought, what?
That's a lot.
Not buying that.
I've got a ton in my yard.
Little buckets are eating my plants.
That's funny. You obviously have an interest in history. Where does that come from?
I guess from school. I think I liked the history teacher. She was always interesting as opposed to the maths.
Yeah, that wasn't my thing.
No good at that at all. But I think maybe I'm nosy, I really don't know. But it interests me that, well, how did they do such a thing? Or why did they do such a thing? And so when I got here, and another thing about growing up in Europe, you're stuck at school learning from BC, the kings and queens and so on, and how long their reign was and what this was. Or you have things like the Pharaoh Khufu built the pyramids. No, he didn't. He might have come down and see how the progress of the building might go, but he wasn't. Whereas what interested me when I was doing the transcripts was that these were the actual people who had names, who were doing the building themselves, so that you can say about the history, let's say, of 29 Palms, I'm saying that specifically, is you can say that the Bagleys, Frank and Helen, opened a store, and they were the first store in 29 Palms. You can say of Morongo Valley, in 18-something, Chuck Warren was looking for wells and was the first homesteader down there, but he was able to grow stuff because he was I think that interests me, that you can actually name the people. I think that's what gets me. And then, of course, when I was with the Park Association, I was the tour guide for Keys Ranch.
Oh, wow.
So there again, you've got a person raising a family, being a jack of all trades, living in isolation. He's a miner, he's a farmer, he's a cattleman. He builds a house and a school for his children and employs somebody to teach them. Yeah. And they're miles from anywhere. And when you actually are in the place where they lived and you're surrounded by... I mean, I went up there and I had a radio in case of emergency. Because the radio didn't work. Simply because you were surrounded by rocks.
Right.
So if any of your tourists decided to fall down and break a leg or something stupid, you'd have to race out to somewhere else to get help.
I think what's interesting to me is it feels recent.
It is to me.
Does that make sense? It feels recent, yet it wasn't so recent. But I think, is it like time moves slower here? Do you think that it feels that way?
Well, put it this way. These people were the same age as my grandparents, which, I mean, I know I'm old now. So if you're growing up, or even my parents, some of the stuff that they didn't have a telephone in the house. They certainly didn't have one that they wandered around with and could tell you 101 things.
Right.
So if you, up there, they had no electricity.
Right.
Let alone a telephone. Things were slower because it took longer to do them. And there wasn't, I think now it's too rushed. And I'm not saying that because, miserable old woman. I think, you're supposed to do everything now. Whereas in the old days, they would do something and do it slowly and well.
And like they appreciated that time. I don't know how else to say it. They were in the moment.
Yes.
They were in the moment because they didn't have all these other distractions either. They were just living.
Yes, they didn't have to go on the television to find out what the weather's going to be like tomorrow.
Right.
It didn't matter.
No.
Or what's the weather going to be like today? I don't know. Have you tried looking outside? That's...
So now in the 30 years?
40
years that you've been here, talk to me about some of the things that have changed, how things were when you got to 29 Palms.
Okay.
And how they've progressed or changed to today.
Okay, well, as I say, we lived more or less in Santa Monica. So you'd get on the 10 freeway, heading out here, and the traffic was certainly not at a standstill in any way. So you drove out on the Route 10, and basically by the time you came to Ontario, you were in the country. Because Ontario, there was actually sheep and cattle at the side of the road.
Now it's all warehouses.
No, there was none of that. So it was quite rural at that particular point. There certainly were no windmills or anything by the time. So you came to the Route 62, which was a 2-lane highway. Although, no, I tell a lie, it was 4-lane as you were going through the canyon, and then it went to a 2-lane highway. There was nothing in Yucca Valley. It was all at the west end, where you've got Pioneer Town, that area. That was Yucca Valley.
Okay.
Very, very little there. And the rest was just open desert, as it were. Little houses here, and very widespread. Of course, we'd no idea about homesteading or 160 acres or 5 acres or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was very little, and then you went along, and the only, let me see, Kentucky Fried Chicken had just opened, and there was the bowling alley. And for reasons totally unknown, because there was no traffic, there was a traffic light at Old Woman Springs Road, which made no sense at all, because there was no traffic, there was nothing there apart from the bowling alley, and why have you got a traffic light? And then you got in the car and you continued on, a wide open desert, 2-lane highway, nothing. If you blinked, you missed Joshua Tree altogether, because there was even less there than there is now, obviously.
Right. No
traffic lights at all whatsoever. 29 Palms at Four Corners, which somebody said to me yesterday, much to my surprise, well, where's Four Corners? Four Corners.
I asked that actually when I think it was either Marilyn or Liz were here last week. Yeah.
It's the junction of the Route 62 or the 29 Palms Highway and Adobe Road. There was a blinking yellow light.
Wow.
That was it. Nothing.
No 7-Eleven, no Denny's.
No 7-Eleven, no nothing. In fact, we came into 29 Palms and we got to the Smoke Tree area before you get to Donnell Hill. And there was a gas station there. which I think is closed now. But there was a gas station, and we thought, is that 29 Palms? So we asked, and they said, oh no, there's more over the hill. There were not that much more, I might add, but there was more over the hill. Then we went to the real estate agent, which is still a real estate agent, although it was called Sunshine Realty at the time. And the real estate agent was J.B. Carroll, who is still at 90-something years old. Still, he and Lois are still working as real estate, although it's a different company now. I think it's Triad now. But anyway, they took us down to, I thought we'd been kidnapped. We got in their car and they drove miles and absolutely nothing. Wide open desert. And then this funny little place in the middle of nowhere. Literally, and that, of course, was our little adobe house.
Right.
It was surrounded by cats and a stray dog and...
Oh, my gosh.
And the guy...
Was someone still living there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But they were about to leave because they thought 29 Palms were getting too crowded. I don't know, can't remember where they were going, but
goodness.
It's getting too crowded. So
Wonder Valley. They were going to Wonder Valley.
Probably.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. And so how about, like, when you moved... You bring all your stuff out, and now you're trying to meet people in the community.
You know, I'm the more I see people, the more I like dogs. And so I used to say, no, I had the kids there, and they were on their motorbikes, stuff like that, and the place was absolutely surrounded by garbage.
Oh, gosh.
So when we'd go out at the weekends, first things first, I start piling up the garbage from all around.
And where did you take it then? Because obviously Burtek didn't come and pick it up.
Oh, hell no. No. First things first was, there was actually a trash removal place. Gino Brignadelli, his name was.
They're always Italian.
Yes, in the trash business. Anyway, Gino came out, because we'd piled it all up in one place, so he duly loaded it into his machine and took it away, I know not where, but it disappeared. Apparently there was some kind of dump somewhere east of town. Later on we discovered where it was. And no, it's quite legit. Quite legit. You'd go out to, let me see, I can't even remember the name of the street now, but I'll take you there. But anyway, it was Granite was the place that made cement. And then around the corner was actually where what is now called a transfer station is located. It was the dump.
Okay.
But we preferred to call it the trading post, because you take your truckload of rubbish out there and then you'd see all sorts of goodies. And so you came back with half a truckload of somebody else's rubbish.
So like when I go to Goodwill, I drop stuff off and I go in and look around.
See? Exactly that. And that's what we would do. We'd go there, oh no, somebody's just demolished a wooden patio or something. I'll collect all the wood. That would keep us warm during the winter.
Right.
That sort of thing. So we got rid of the trash, and then of course the library. We got to know a person or two in the library. The art gallery. Because the place was smaller, there was a lot, I wouldn't say there was a lot more going on, but there's fewer people who participated in more things. The art gallery, there was no historical society, but if there was an outing going for something or other, a barbecue to raise funds for something or other, everybody went. So you got to know people, this person, that person, and the other. And of course they'd say, oh, you're new, and they would ask you about what you were doing or give you advice or so on.
Do you remember any of the advice that anybody gave you when you first got here?
Well, not to worry about too many things. Nobody had much money. So, and you couldn't tell anybody, they didn't worry about how you dressed or anything else. It was, they just took you for you.
There's something to be said for that.
Don't forget to drink plenty of water. You lose 100% of your body heat from your head. Wear a hat. If you're cold, put on a hat. You know, some of the things sounded kind of silly, but...
Was the base here?
Oh, yes.
It was?
Yeah. The base, as per se, started in the 40s.
Somebody said it was a glider training?
Yes, glider training, and then the Army Air Corps took over as a training base for gliders originally, and then they went into primary planes. After the war, This is World War II, of course. After the war, the Navy took over for a little while because they needed to shoot off more ordnance and needed more space, you see. But that didn't last very long, and they put... Now, I've never understood this. The area was put in mothballs.
Oh.
I guess that it still belonged. It was still a government entity, but there was nobody.
It was like
there.
No action. Everybody shut
action.
down, quiet. Yeah.
So it was 52, I believe, was when the Marines came in.
Okay. So how long do you think it was shut down before they came?
Oh, a couple of years.
A couple of years.
Most,
oh, okay.
At most, I really don't know, but it was a short period of time. So 52 or 3, when the Marines came in, and then they have been there ever since. And of course, the size of the base has not grown. It's still 932 square miles. But of course, the building and the personnel and everything else. I mean, it's a...
Have you been out there?
I have, and got some fascinating things. But the only time I've been out there has been like there was an outing from the Historical Society, and that was absolutely fascinating. They took us here and everywhere. They have a building where, talking about modern day, it's like a great video game in a huge building, but of course it's training for shooting at things and so on. But the thing that fascinated me most about it was their recycling plant. Everything gets recycled. It was fascinating.
Wow.
Absolutely fascinating.
Well, that's good because there are a lot of people out there, so I'm glad to hear that that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And so that I think was the... But I don't go on because we're not military.
Yeah, me either, so I haven't been out there.
Not going to.
Right.
But if you ever get the opportunity to take one of the trips, I know the Morongo Basin Historical Society did one, I think, last year.
Oh, okay.
And we did one about 3 years ago.
I'll keep an eye on that.
Keep an eye.
Because that is a kind of a misnomer. I think so many people who don't live here, and I'm sure it's increased since you've been here, but there is plenty to do if you want to find something to do.
Yeah.
And if you don't...
There's too much, actually.
Right, and if you don't, you just don't. You can stay in your place and do whatever. But yeah, I find myself some nights wondering, where should I go? Because there is a lot going on. And 9 times out of 10, I know at least one person at each event, who's either showing their work, playing their instrument, or doing whatever. And it just makes it for a hard choice.
Yeah, I mean, we're finding we don't do quite so much because now that we're old and bad-tempered... going out at night and the driving and the lights and glasses are supposed to be
helpful.
No, they're not. They're not. So we don't go out as much. For example, in 29 Palms, there's the observatory. Well, they do lots of things, not so much during the daytime, but after the sun goes down.
Exactly.
And that's fascinating. I noticed there's more art going on in Joshua Tree now than there ever used to be, because it used to be Wonder Valley and 29 Palms. So there's stuff going on at the gallery. Now there's a historical society which got started in 1982 and has grown since, and we're now trying to expand. I say we like I own the place.
Well, you take some ownership because now you've been there 40 years and you've got some interest there,
I was a charter member, I'll have you know, yes.
Wow.
When they first started. So, of course, they started, first of all, in an adobe house, which used to be the ice house. But then they moved to what is now City Hall, which wasn't, of course, City Hall then. And then, of course, when the schoolhouse was no longer required by the Morongo Basin School District, they offered it to the Historical Society for $1.
Wow.
As long as we moved it within 2 years.
Oh, so you were here for the move, because I heard it was a big, there was, the marching band was there and everything.
Oh, absolutely. A Marine Color Guard,
wow.
For starters. There was the high school band, and people accompanied the schoolhouse, and they used to go there. And what got me was they were able to lift this building, this 3-room building, all in one piece. And the middle part of the building is not wood, it's brick. That in itself
was ingenuity
and the engineering. So they were able, whoever they were, the company were able to move it on a truck, and then there was this wonderful slow parade for a couple of miles to where it is now.
Oh my gosh! So where, for people listening who don't know, where was it originally?
Originally, it would be, if you're looking for it, it would be where the Morongo Basin School District offices are located on 2 Mile Road and Utah Trail at the conjunction thereof.
I see. Okay.
And that's where the schoolhouse was located.
Right. And now moved to...
the 29 Palms Historical Society to form its museum, which is located just outside the 29 Palms on National Park Drive and
Sullivan?
Cottonwood.
Oh, Cottonwood. Okay.
Cottonwood.
Just for people to get a sense of... And do you remember what year that was that it was moved?
92. 1992.
Oh, okay.
And it took a couple of years then to refurbish it, to bring it up to building code standards and electrical and plumbing. And of course you had to have handicap accessible and to have bathrooms and so on and so forth. And since then, the Historical Society has also built, or separate to it but adjacent, is a research area which is climate controlled, so we've got a lot of stuff in storage, and people come, unfortunately, because we haven't got 101 volunteers, it's only on Wednesday mornings from 9 to noon that somebody could come and do research. But we've got paperwork from the homesteaders, books, of course, photographs, millions of photographs, and of course a lot of this, and transcripts of the things that had been recorded early on.
Do you know who recorded those originally? Was it different people?
Now, here's another 29 Palms story, which I was lucky to take advantage of. In the 70s, the librarian at 29 Palms was Cheryl Erickson. And at that time, I think it was Mrs. Campbell had died. And again, a homesteader, big house, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But the nephew came in with some of her stuff, and the rest he'd taken to the dump. And Cheryl said at that point, this is our history. It should not be going to the dump.
What great vision and foresight on her part.
So she and Harold Waite, who was another of the librarians, decided to start a local history collection in the library. They were the first in San Bernardino County to do so. Now, you know how big San Bernardino County is.
Biggest county in the United States.
Exactly. So Cheryl and Harold got started. Obviously, it was a few cabinets, so they couldn't take too much, but it was the transcripts of some of the recordings, its photographs, newspapers, magazines, books on that they'd buy, books for the library on the local history, whatever it was. It just kept adding to it. Then the Historical Society was opened in 82. And I don't know exactly what the date was, but it was somewhere around 2000 when the powers that be in the county of San Bernardino decided that all, what is the word they used? Non-essential material be removed from the library. And they considered that the local history was non-essential material.
Oh my goodness.
Luckily, then librarian Linda Muller didn't throw it out, which she could have done. She gave it all to the Historical Society. So all that original stuff that was started in the 70s by Cheryl is now in the Historical Society, in the files where people could do their research. And Cheryl is still on the board of the Historical Society.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. And that's why I guess I feel like all of that history, even though it was long ago, still feels so close because many of these people are still doing this collection and archiving. Yeah,
absolutely. The thing about Pioneer Days in 29 Palms in October, the Historical Society has what they call the Old Timers Gathering. And this was started by old timers way back when their friends that they were homesteading with probably in their 30s came back to 29 Palms for Pioneer Days or to visit. And they'd have just a get-together. Well, when the Historical Society was formed, they continued the old-timers gathering. So, of course, the original old-timers, I don't think there's any of them left now, but their children are.
Yes.
Because they're up in years.
As a matter of fact, it's how I was introduced to the research room. I was there at the most recent, I guess the Desert Institute now sponsors these conversations at the Historical Society.
Yeah, together. Yeah.
Right. And I came to the one with the Dunns. Bob and Jeff and their sister Barbie came back, and they had old film footage of some of the parades. in downtown 29 Palms, and just being in the room because the space is limited. So I know that there's fundraising going on to try and expand the room.
So
yeah,
because I couldn't get in.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think I showed up with someone and we got 2 of the last 3 seats that were available, and there were still 30 minutes before the talk was even starting.
Exactly.
It was full. The feeling that I had in the room over and above what I saw and heard from the Duns was that it's still a very close community among those people, because a lot of them now are the ones who grew up together there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and it was really nice feeling to feel that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, Bob and Jeff were our insurance agents when we first came, but we also knew their parents.
Right, and then I learned that night that their dad became an insurance agent because the State Farm guy was coming to 29 Palms, and they were looking for a place to put an office, and he'd come to the gas station so many times and then asked their dad, like,
Ralph,
why don't you be the agent? Because he was always telling him like where to go and giving him directions and stuff, and that Ralph was very close with Frank Bagley. So I guess that's why, too, it doesn't feel like it's that far away, because some of the people that are still here from that original, those original homesteaders are still here.
Well, you see, Jim Bagley gave one of those talks.
He did, and I just actually saw his, he was part of Desert Stories, the fundraiser they do at the High Desert Cultural Center twice a year. He spoke there and told his story. So I guess that's why it feels so close, even though it happened a while ago.
Yeah, but as I say, you don't think it's that long ago. It's not 500 years ago.
No, it was like the 20s, right?
Yeah.
The mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
So,
right?
yeah.
20s and 30s, and then, of course, a lot of the growth came after World War II. So we're back into the 40s and 50s. And
Right,
so on
exactly.
and so forth.
And talk to me about those kind of waves of people coming and going. Have you seen many of those where all of a sudden it's chic or trendy to go to the desert and then they leave, or has there been any of that? Have you seen any of that?
I don't pay much attention to what people are doing, to tell you the truth. But no, it's, what can I say? For example, Wonder Valley. Now, they were definitely different. The people, when we first came, the people that lived in Wonder Valley were different. They'd like to be isolated. They didn't want to be bothered particularly with people and parties and things. The Palms, of course, was a place to go. There was also Barnett's Trading Post, which burnt down a few years ago.
Where was that?
That was on Amboy Road.
Okay.
Yeah, but before you got to the Palms, on the left-hand side, if you're coming from 29, was Barnett's Trading Post. And that, again, they had food in the bar and so on and so forth. They also had a baseball team, or a softball team, I can't remember which, called the Wonder Valley Wonders. They had lots of silly things. They had pool tournaments and what have you, and then, of course, the Palms that had the entertainment in the evening and so on. So that was kind of the little, as is now, the little gathering place. But a lot of writers and painters and stuff. So it was more an artist community, and people who were a little different lived out in Wonder Valley. But as I say, they weren't peculiar in any way, shape or form. And then it sort of, I don't know, it kind of calmed down, and the artist trend seemed to be, at the moment, all in Joshua Tree. Then, of course, there was more artists. And 50 or more years ago, the art gallery started an open studio tour. There's only 2 people on it. But it was, it was John Hilton and, oh dear, I've forgotten the other lady's name. But anyway, there was 2 people. But then there was nothing done about it until Chuck Kaplinger decided to start this open studio tours. When there was, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 studios.
And now you can barely get through all of them.
Yeah,
even in 2 weekends.
Impossible.
Yeah.
And it used to be also, and I don't know who's running this thing now because I had a big argument with him, one of the open studio tour weekends was always the same weekend as the weed show in 29 Palms, which is always on the first full weekend in November. Always. It doesn't change. And what they used to do with the open studio tours was one weekend, obviously, would be Yucca and Morongo, and the other weekend, which included 29 Palms and the weed show and Joshua Tree.
Oh, I see.
So those are the way it went. But they've changed it around. But as I say, there's so many studios now.
Right, yeah.
It's impossible.
It's almost intimidating. I get the book and look through it. I'm doing something else, probably in a show and rehearsals or something at the theater. But it's overwhelming. Like, I can't even begin to start to map out where to go. It's
exactly.
just too much.
Exactly.
So for anybody who has a thought of moving to the desert,
stay home.
That's your advice.
Where you came from.
What would you say to them?
Take the desert as it is. Don't try to change it. This is what rather annoyed me about Palm Springs. People come from all over. Palm Springs, you could have said, was like up here. It was a fresh air, clean, dry air, good for your health, blah, blah, blah. But oh no, we have to dig out the cactus and put in a lawn and a golf course, of course, and then we have to water it, which means that we now have mosquitoes, and now we have mosquito abatement, and so on. And it,
right.
Nag. On. We've got to have all these shops. We've got to have, that. Don't try and change it.
No.
Come enjoy it. I mean, they're talking about that. Is it Dollar General or something?
Oh, yes.
Why? Rubbish?
Well, I went online to kind of see what their deal was. Mm-hmm. And reading up on Joshua Tree before I moved, mm-hmm. one of the things that was very attractive to me was that the community kind of got behind these things and said, you know what, we don't want this here, go away. But the other day it kind of came up because it's like an anniversary of, they've been trying to put it up there for 10 years and we keep fighting it. But I think they're finally going through some approvals to get water or something's going on. I don't know. But anyway, I said, what is their interest in putting 6 stores within 6 miles each of each other? Because you've got one in Landers, you've got one now, a new one in Morongo, mm-hmm. you've got one in, I don't know, Yucca Valley.
There's one in 29.
There's one in 29, and now, so they're all like within 6 miles of each other. And essentially what I read through the business information that I read online, Bloomberg, etc., was that they are essentially betting on the fact that there will be this expanded lower middle class of people that will need to shop at their store. And I thought, that's horrible.
How condescending.
Exactly. And it reminded me kind of that whole mortgage crisis that we went through, where these people were they were giving loans to people who couldn't afford them, mm-hmm. and then taking out insurance as kind of a bet that they would default mm-hmm. so that they could make money on it. And I was very disappointed. I mean, I don't really, I guess I'm fortunate that I don't need to shop in that store, mm-hmm. but I think what really gets at it was, what kind of business model is that?
But what do you need in that store? I'm sorry, I have been in a Dollar General and I don't really see anything that I want. I mean, a small family-owned market like we used to have in 29 Palms, Bagley's store.
Right.
I mean, there still is a plaza market, but it's not quite the same because now there's Stater Brothers and people drive to Vons and Walmart and so on. Mm-hmm. And there was also the Alamo market. It was 2 small markets in 29 Palms before there was Stater Brothers. And it was quite simple. You didn't have 5 million cereals and 5 million this and that. You had a range of cereals, mm-hmm. probably the most popular. You had milk and cream and butter and eggs and
your basics.
And here's the bacon and so on. And here's some vegetables. We've got potatoes and onions and cabbage. And
mm-hmm.
small. Obviously, if you wanted something more fancy, then you'd have to drive out of town.
Right.
Or do sometimes like we do. And I sort of hark back to the covered wagon days, when the people, every 6 months they sort of loaded up the wagon.
Exactly.
And got flour. Every now and again, and probably twice a year, we load up the wagon and go down to Costco and mm-hmm. get the detergent and the toilet paper.
I can count probably on both my hands the number of times I've even driven down to Palm Springs, and I've been here for, I'll be here 2 years in July.
Okay.
But I haven't been down the hill more than 6-8 times.
Brilliant. That's the way to go.
Yeah. And some of them were for work. Some of them were for jobs. So it wasn't even just to go down there to shop. Or sometimes you want maybe a little fancy meal. So you drive down there and you have your fancy meal and then you come home. But I don't feel the need. Like a lot of people go every week. They go to Trader Joe's or whatever. And that's not, I don't need that.
No, well, at our age, we go down the hill not for a job, but it's a doctor's appointment.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I am so glad to have you here today. I'm really glad that you came.
Well, thank you. I hope
sharing your history of being here in the desert.
Well, I hope it's been of some use.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. Thanks for sharing everything that you've learned over the last 40 years. And
Well, thank you, and I hope your listeners will enjoy the high desert.
I hope so too. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast. I want you to know how much I appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If you heard something that inspired or enlightened you, I'd love to hear about it. Send an email to desertladydiaries@gmail.com or start a discussion with other listeners at the Desert Lady Diaries Facebook page. And this week, I'm looking for your help. I'm looking for more desert ladies of color to interview for the podcast. So if you're listening and you know someone, please either have her contact me directly via the email or send an email with her name and contact information to desertladydiaries@gmail.com, and please copy her on the email as well. After hearing from some longtime desert ladies the past few weeks, we'll get a perspective of author Ivy Pacoda next week, who, as a frequent visitor, has found inspiration here for her most recent book titled Wonder Valley. Thanks so much for listening.